Says Andy Burnham, thanks ever so much for taking the time this morning.
You're welcome.
I think I'm right in saying you acknowledge the necessity of these measures, but you think the manner in which they were announced was a little bit clumsy.
That's a pretty good summary. But yes, on the substance, we do accept that these steps are needed. They're modest steps. We're asking people not to have visitors at home. If they go to the pub, to stick within their own household. Steps that hopefully will prevent much more severe restrictions if we take firm action at this time. And the reason for it, Colin, is the picture changed in Greater Manchester over the last week. We're watching the data very, very closely, like the government is. So when the government contacted me to say, look, we think something is happening here, I could already see that it was. And it wasn't just in one locality. There was a change across all of our boroughs, and that's why we said to the government that they were right to take quick action.
Yeah, we'll come into the measures specifically in a moment, but just in terms of how you make these announcements, it's quite difficult for the government, isn't it, really? Because I know they were criticised, for instance, with the quarantine period and the fact they announced that on a Saturday evening. People had 5 hours' notice, but there was a reason for that as well, to stop people sort of circumventing the rules, flying back early. There isn't a perfect way of making these announcements, or is there?
No, I don't think there is a perfect way, and I understand how hard this is for government ministers, having been one myself, and I think at the moment they're adopting feels like a new strategy of the minute they see something, they are taking decisive action, and I think that's probably the right way to go. But here's the one caveat I would place on it. They have a habit of saying something and then it being a few hours until the detail emerges, and that certainly was the case last night. And later on last night, a lot of people, I think, felt very uncertain as to what exactly was being announced. So what I would say to them is, I understand the need to make announcements, I understand the need for decisive action, but when ministers go in front of the cameras, make sure you've got the detail ready to go exactly at the same time.
Yeah. I'm sure they might say it's difficult when you've got lots of stakeholders involved, and if somebody knows something, then they might tweet it, and suddenly the message is out, and it can look quite ham-fisted, can't it? Just in terms of the enforceability of the thing, to some degree, this is going to be devolved to local authorities, obviously local police forces as well. How enforceable do you think this is going to prove?
Clearly, it's going to be challenging, and we're going to have to look to people themselves first to do the right thing and to respect these new requirements, because they're being brought in for a good reason. That is to protect everybody here. Let's get to the substance of it as well, though. I think the reason the government have chosen these particular measures is because of the evidence of a rise in cases in households where there were gatherings. And I think that's why they wanted a very clear statement on that particular issue. And this doesn't just relate to multi-generational households where people are living together. We've seen situations in parts of Greater Manchester where there's been a rise in cases amongst younger people, and that, it's felt, possibly is also linked to house gatherings. So I can understand why the government is sending a really clear message on that particular issue. And I would say to everybody, the quicker we follow this advice, the quicker these restrictions will be lifted. I've agreed with the Secretary of State that they will be reviewed weekly. This is a preventative step, if you like, on the precautionary principle. And I think if we all follow it, it's not a massive change to make, and it's not a huge amount to ask, then I think we could quickly see these cases come back down in the other direction.
Yeah, as you say, it's different communities that are affected. There's been a particular focus, hasn't there, on, as you say, homes, multiple occupancy, intergenerational habitation going on there. We've got Eid coming up this weekend. What is your message to people of South Asian ancestry amongst the 2.8 million Mancunians you represent as they approach this weekend? It's a difficult balancing act between wanting to observe religious ceremonies and rituals and pay homage to all that whilst observing these new social distancing rules.
Oh, certainly. I recognise how disruptive this might be to people's plans, as you say, with Eid this weekend. People can still go to the mosque, so there's no restriction on that. Of course, people would have to observe distancing in the mosque, but there's been a lot of work going on to ensure that the proper measures are in place there. So it's not about preventing people going to worship. It is, of course, about gatherings back at home. and that is something that nobody has kind of wanted to have to do, but the circumstances have pretty much demanded it. And it's true of everybody, really. It's decent weather today here in Greater Manchester. We're not always in a position to say that, but we are today. And, you know, we've got to say to everybody in all parts of the city region, you know, please, well, don't gather in your home, because this is clearly a source of spread of the virus amongst all age groups, actually, and in all geographies. And that's why the government, reluctantly, I accepted that they were right to propose this measure.
And I suppose that the blunt truth is, if this doesn't work, you can expect more draconian lockdown measures.
Well, we don't want to see that, and I've been arguing against that in many ways. You know, that we need all of the data to stop that happening. So you will have heard me on your programmes over recent weeks saying, give us the data, let us see the picture. And finally, that data came through once the government kind of agreed to what I was saying. So I could see exactly what they could see earlier this week, and so could all of the council leaders in Greater Manchester. And we could see that there was a problem that required firmer action. So when the Health Secretary called me, I wasn't surprised. You know, I kind of was in the same mindset myself. You know, what are we going to do here to quickly nip this situation in the bud? So, you know, having called to the data, having had the ability to see the picture, obviously I was in a position to agree with what he was saying.
Andy Burnham, very good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Andrew, thanks very much, Colin.